You're right here.
Okay.
Well, we've already welcomed Minister Farrakhan formally upstairs in my office, and I think I should explain to you, Minister, that things are very informal around here. We have no protocol. Everybody, of course, knows who you are, and if they don't, they shouldn't be in this room. And we started right off with questions, if you don't mind. I understand that you are not eating. You've trained yourself to get along on one meal a day.
Yes, sir.
I'm working toward it. Haven't quite made it.
You look like you're in good shape.
Anyway, I would like to start off, if I may, invoke the privilege of rank and ask you to bring us up to date on the Nation of Islam and what its goals are and how different they are today from a few years ago. The evolution in recent years.
Thank you. If I may, first I'd like to thank Mr. Dvorak for his invitation and the honor and the privilege of meeting all of you. With me today is our Chief of Staff, Leonard Farrakhan Mohammed, our National Spokesman, Dr. Alim from Washington, D.C.,
Of Mayfair fame.
Of Mayfair fame, our National Assistant, Brother Akbar Muhammad, the editor of the Final Call newspaper, Brother Abdul Ali Muhammad, my son, Mustafa Farrakhan, Minister George Muhammad, and Minister Brother William. This is part of the security team, and Sister Ruth Muhammad. We're all delighted to be here. Well, as I'm sure you may have read or heard or researched, the Nation of Islam was started by a very mysterious individual, according to the accounts from outside of the nation, but a magnificent human being who came among us in 1930. He used many different names, but he gave us the name on his leaving, that his name was W. Farad, F-A-R-D, Muhammad. He came to raise the black man and woman of America up from the condition that nearly 400 years of slavery had imposed upon us. And that condition he described as being one of mental death. And by mental death, he described it as Scripture says, having eyes but not being able to see, having ears but not being able to really hear, having a tongue that has not spoken what it has not heard, and in the language of the Masonics or the Shriners, being on a dead level, having the necessity to be raised to mental, moral, spiritual, social, political, and economic life. He had many students, but his best student, and the one that he left to stand in his place on his departure, was the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And he began building the movement. And his history is, I'm sure, well known by you, his teachings. At first, he was listed as a hate teacher, anti-white, anti-American, and I'm sure you recall his chief student, Malcolm X, who was his national representative. But as we got into the late 60s, the press began to see Mr. Muhammad a little differently, and perhaps we evolved a little more. So the reference to him as a hate teacher dropped, and he was then known as Elijah Muhammad, leader of a separatist movement. But he was building independent schools, farms, factories. We had a newspaper that was the largest weekly newspaper among our people, with a circulation of nearly 1 million copies per week. We had our own printing press, printing plant. We were negotiating for what do you call those places where they make the paper? Where they it's actually the wood pulp that you make. A mill, that's it. We had a few airplanes, and he was negotiating with United Airlines for a fleet of airplanes. We were trying to buy Tuskegee Institute to return it to the principles of its founder. We had begun international trade and commerce, and as a group we were making great strides. And in 1975, Mr. Muhammad departed from among us, and his son, Wallace Muhammad, now known as Imam Warithuddin Muhammad, assumed the leadership. And at that time, his son saw bringing the movement into more mainstream Islam as a prime requisite or prerequisite to our international acceptance. And he felt that we should be more accepted by the American society. And so all of the things that seemed to frighten America about our movement, he moved to try to dispel these things. Unfortunately, it had a negative effect on those of us who followed the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And so the movement began to disintegrate. In 1977, I decided, along with one other person, to try to rebuild the movement according to the teachings and principles taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And for 7 years, I refused to make any comments to the press. I would not be interviewed at all, following a principle. And that principle was articulated to me by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and it goes like this. When a seed is germinating in the earth, it sends a root down long before it sends a shoot up. And when you see the shoot come up, it has been working underneath, getting its roots for a long time. This is so that when it comes above the ground, it will have the stability that it needs to weather whatever storms may come against it. We followed that principle, and we worked in cities and towns throughout America, quietly rebuilding his work. And in 1981, we surfaced. From 1977 to 1981, we surfaced, but still I did not speak to the press at all. I felt that if what we were doing were misunderstood and misrepresented, it would be very, very harmful to the movement, particularly when it was so fragile. So in '83, during the March on Washington, the 20th anniversary of the March on Washington, I was invited by Mrs. King and Congressman Fauntleroy and others to participate, which we did. And I might add that during this quiet time, I made contact with all of the civil rights leaders, Dr. Ben Hooks, John Jacobs, Coretta Scott King, Ralph David Abernathy, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, other clergy, and black elected officials, black business people, to let them know something of what we were attempting to do in rebuilding the work of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And this was to establish a rapport and some kind of understanding between us. And in '83, I spoke at the March on Washington, and the speech seemed to catch a lot of people by surprise, and the Reverend Jackson told me that he wanted to meet with me when we got back to Chicago, and we met, and he asked me if I would join him as he was thinking about running for the presidency of the United States. It was a big decision for me, and so we met as a body and discussed it, and as a body we agreed to help the Reverend Jackson. And Reverend Jackson asked me if I would come out of this self-imposed silence and speak with the press. And so in 1984, that was the first time that I spoke to and with the press. It was on Reverend Jackson's behalf. But unfortunately, that was a critical time period. And there were those who were frightened by Reverend Jackson's candidacy, and the rest of it is sort of like history. The Milton Coleman affair, the Jaime remark, the Judaism is a gutter religion, the Hitler is great, and all of these things that were thrown into that campaign, and ultimately the Reverend's repudiation of Louis Farrakhan, and Mr. Bush speaking against me, Mr. Hart, all the candidates, all the news media, and of course the Washington Times was right on on point. And I wish, in truth, that I had a room in my home that I could take all of the cartoons that were in the many newspapers around the country. I really grew to appreciate the genius of the cartoonists. And of course, if I believed that I were that kind of fellow, I would have been tormented terribly by what was said of me. But we kept right on moving, and by the grace of God, we have grown now to retrieve many of our national properties that we once had. And now, I think, without question, there's not another black leader in the United States that is drawing the people and has the ear of black people as Louis Farrakhan. And so it appears that no matter what has been said against me, God has blessed us to weather those storms. And lastly, I think it is appropriate, after all of the heat, if you will, that has been generated, that we perhaps meet like this to see if there's some light that can come out of the heat, and perhaps something better might be realized. So again, I thank Mr. de Beaugrave for the privilege and the honor of this invitation, and to meet all of you, and to have a chance to talk with you and not to you, and to have you question me candidly and frankly, and to have me hopefully answer your questions as you have asked them.
Thank you, Mr. I wonder if you could tell us your view of the indictment of Mayor Barry and whether you consider that it was racially motivated.
I think it would be fair to say that if the federal government spent millions of dollars trying to get an indictment on the mayor, we would have to uncover what that motivation was, because they didn't spend those millions of dollars in the last 2 years of his being mayor. This was spent over a period of many, many years. I would think that along with things that have been done and are being done to black elected officials throughout this nation, we believe that there is racially motivated moves to weaken black elected officials, to discover weaknesses, and even to encourage weaknesses in order to break these strong advocates, particularly the strongest ones, who advocate the justice for our people. Now, with the case of Mayor Barry specifically, it is unfortunate that he gave those who may have been racially motivated something with which to do him harm. And it has left the city of Washington now like a ship without a rudder.
Yes.
Minister Farrakhan, it seems to me, if in terms of rhetoric alone, not yours necessarily, but it seems to me that there's an increasing polarization between the races in this country. Not intentionally, I'm sure, but it's just the rhetoric is stepping up. The Barry probe is racially motivated. No, it's not. The genocide in school curriculums is just something we wrote about earlier this week. Obviously, people feel strongly on both sides. Do you see a solution? It seems to me that this thing is just snowballing. It's just getting worse and worse and worse. It seems to me, I think a lot of people you talk to are almost apocalyptic about it. They almost see that there will be a violent, God forbid, but they see that there'll be some kind of violent outcome to this. How do we tone down the rhetoric? Or is there a way to do that? Is it a lot of your rhetoric, for example, seems to me to be almost black separatist, a separate nation, or something like that. Is that the path to pursue?
Your question, how do we tone down the rhetoric? By rhetoric, give me what you specifically mean by the term rhetoric.
Okay, well, perhaps rhetoric is a poor choice of words. What I'm saying is, for example, we heard a lot of people in the last year or so on the Nightline program. For example, there was an open meeting about a year ago, and a lot of people said, okay, the drug problem is a genocidal thing, that white people are providing the drugs for black people. We have a story on Monday in our paper about curriculum that a lot of black educators are saying they characterize the current history curriculum, for example, as genocidal miseducation.
Okay.
Strong language.
Big word.
The question, sir, is what is being said truth? Or is it just a misperception of reality?
Well, let me ask you, larger than that,
Mm-hmm.
okay, whether or not it's truth. I mean, truth has many faces, as we both know, depending on your perspective. The question is that this kind of argument is leading to an increasingly polarized society. So what can we do about that?
Well, your first question was how do we tone it down? I think, if you're a maker of soup or you're a cook, and there's one element in the makeup of it that seems to be overpowering the other elements, the question is, how do you tone down that element? You have to bring something else into it that balances that thing that is standing out. So what do we bring to this troubled equation that would balance out the rhetoric or the language that seems to be affecting polarization? And I think what we're talking about here is bringing to the table that which is just and fair to the people who are crying out for justice. If I may just say just a few quick words on polarization. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad said to us many years ago that separation would ultimately solve the problem between the races. This was not separation out of hatred, but it was separation out of the recognition of certain facts that were not going to go away, but would get increasingly worse by our failure to look at the facts and assess them properly. Fact number one, we have an ever-increasing population. That there is no future prepared for our millions of unemployed and millions of unemployable. And the social scientists and the writers, some of whom may be in this room, have talked about blacks as a permanent underclass, which says to us that there is either no will on the part of the policymakers to correct this, or there are no resources to correct it, or a combination of both. Now, as John Kennedy was the president that really pushed for integration, trying to make America work as a pluralistic society. This kind of integration led to the breakup of black economic development in the South that we had gained through segregation. It never quite accomplished the integration or the desired results that was hoped by the Brown versus the Board of Education decision. Now, the rhetoric of persons like myself or Jesse or others on the other side of this question is pointing to a Supreme Court that is cutting back on the gains made by the civil rights movement, the widening of the gap between those who have and those who have not, who are black, the weakening of the judicial system where justice is concerned for our people. All of these things do not portend good for the future of our people. On the other side of that, you have whites of this nation who actually feel that the government has gone too far in this idea of pluralism. So you have the growth of a conservative mentality among whites, manifested not only in the conservative policies of a Ronald Reagan, and possibly George Bush, but manifested again not only in an increasingly conservative Supreme Court, but manifested, yes sir, please, manifested in the rise of the mentality of the Ku Klux Klan, the Aryan Brotherhood, and the skinheads. And for America and those who write to condemn the skinheads, say, who represent the extreme of the white right, we say. But what are they really saying? They are saying no more than the founding fathers of this country said when they set it up. The words of the Constitution are beautiful, but they never were meant to include blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans, Arabs, Asians. When they said we the people, it didn't mean us. So the skinheads are saying, look, let's go back to what the founding fathers have said. And by the way, it meant, and we didn't mean Jews, meaning the founding fathers. So now the skinheads have taken a position. We don't want Jews, we don't want blacks, we don't want Hispanics. And they say that this is a very Christian position. And where did they get that from? Go right back to the founding fathers, who were Christians, but slave owners. Christians, so-called, who deprived human beings of the right to be human beings and deprived us of our humanity. Now, we can deal with the Aryan Brotherhood and with the skinheads in courts of law. We can send agents in to investigate them and incriminate them for violence and whatnot. But the hypocrisy of this is that nobody is willing to go back to the root. You keep wanting to deal with the fruit without exposing the root that produced that fruit. And so unless America is willing to say, well, the view of the founding fathers, the words were good, but their view was narrow.
But we have said that,
We
haven't
fought
we?
a war about that.
We fought a war, we amended the Constitution.
You know,
and that viewpoint's been rejected
a lot of
by
deceit.
mainstream society.
A lot of deceit right there in those very words. You did not fight a war to free us. That's hypocrisy. You fought a war to preserve a union. Let's be very clear and honest. Mr. Lincoln in the Lincoln-Douglas debate said, if freeing the slaves would preserve the Union, I'd free the slaves. But if I could preserve the Union without freeing the slaves, I would not free the slaves. So his war was not for and on behalf of black people and our liberation. Now, so, and I want to be very clear to you and honest with you in that emancipation was never intended to be freedom. Freedom is freedom. Emancipation as a word has no connection to freedom. Here you have people that have been your slaves for 300 years, deprived of name, language, culture, history, God, religion, deprived of education, and now we are let go without anything to go with. So the 13th Amendment of the Constitution struck down involuntary slavery. But after you've robbed people of the mind to go free, they become voluntary slaves. So what you have in America now are people who have voluntarily submitted to a system that has never really been for their good. Not even to this day is this system working for the poor, disenfranchised black people of this nation.
What's the solution? That's my question. I mean, you're talking about how the black economic structure has suffered since the 50s. I know obviously you advocate a lot of strong, you have a big black economic message. But again, it sounds to me like you're proposing a black separatist message. Is that the solution? Or is there a viable solution given, I don't disagree with your interpretation at all. The question is, what's the solution?
I think as you see the trends moving more and more toward polarization, in spite of efforts by well-meaning people on both sides to stem that tide. I have watched television put black and white together in sitcoms, in soap operas, and we're together in movies and love scenes, and we're in boardrooms now and in bedrooms, and all of these things are being done to foster integration, yet polarization is taking place. I think we're going to have to ultimately see that there's a greater power at work here than the power that is being used to foster that which you call pluralism. And the answer ultimately is going to be separation. That's the trend, and that's what it ultimately will be, because America is not providing a future for 30 to 40 million people. We have to be allowed to provide that future for ourselves. And we're saying that separation to us, with us, is like Nelson Mandela's armed struggle. It's like a last resort if all that we have here in America does not work to produce justice for all, then we as a people have to think about what is best for the future of us as a people. And so we think that answer is separation.
How does separation, Minister Farrakhan, work as you see it 10, 15, 20 years down the road in a world that seems to be increasingly integrated, whether we're talking about the 12 of Western Europe who are already overtaken by events in Eastern Europe, and all of this is supposed to become a larger ensemble. What I'm getting at is the globalization of so many things, and you're talking about separation at a time when people are talking about integration. So how would that be practical 10, 15, 20 years down the road?
And are you talking about geographic separation rather than
Okay.
just a separation, separate development?
It seems to me that what I am talking and we are talking is exactly what is happening. And what you are talking is what you wish for, but you're not doing anything to produce.
Exactly.
And that's the hypocritical aspect of the whole thing. You're talking about let's all get together, but you're not doing anything to affect that. And it takes a lot more than our being here together in niceties to bring that about. It takes a lot more than Mr. Bush admitting some black people into the White House, giving them access to bring this about. Do you realize what it actually takes to bring about what you're talking about? Have you given that some depth of thought? Or really, do you care? Or do you just care when I come?
No, we think about it all the time.
You do?
What does it
Yes.
take? What does it take?
You tell us what it
You
takes.
tell us, because we think about it all the time.
Okay.
No, I do.
3 points.
Now, in honesty, going back to the first statement that was made, and I hope that my frankness is not meant in disrespect
Absolutely not. That's
to
the whole
anyone,
point of this one.
because I really think that honest dialogue, even if we disagree, will help us to get together quicker than hypocrisy. So, and I know you don't expect me to be anything other than honest, as I don't expect that from you. But now, you mentioned a term that was used, genocidal education. Here in America, you have a political document, which is the finest in the world, the Constitution of the United States. Yet, the view of the Founding Fathers was very narrow when it was formed, and racist. by today's definition. Okay? Now you have an educational and religious system that supports what was done to our fathers in dehumanizing us, and the Constitution as calling us 3/5 of a human being. And to this very day, our people, I'm talking about in the mass, not this brother or this sister that are in this audience, but I'm talking about the youngsters that are out there that don't want to go to school, that have no real future. Our people and what we're doing to self and each other are looked upon as animals. Now, in honesty, you don't want to integrate with that, and you know it. Because those in this room who are black, who have evolved beyond the ghetto mentality, I'm talking about black middle class themselves, itself as a class, does not want to integrate with those brothers and sisters of theirs in the ghetto that they have to walk by every day to get here, or ride on public transportation with, and feel embarrassed by the language that we speak, the way we act, the way we dress. I mean, let's be honest.
Do you really believe that?
Huh?
You really believe that when every last one of us in this room can just put one hand behind us and be home in the ghetto?
Yes, that's a realization of some of us.
That's not true in black.
But that's not true of all of us, and I'm putting myself here with you, sister, that all of us as black people who have one step up above where our people live don't feel like reaching back and pulling a brother or sister out. Maybe you do. Maybe this gentleman and this sister does. But that, as a rule, is not the case. If it were, we as an entity would be doing more to prepare a future for our people rather than laying at the foot of America begging white people to do for us what we could unite and do for ourselves. So to talk about integration is a serious, serious dialogue. I'm going right back to genocidal education. It is ugly on the white side and the black side, because most white students and white people have been deprived of a true knowledge of the people who were brought into this country to serve as slaves. We have been deprived. It is a crime of omission as well as a crime of commission. And that crime of omission and the crime of commission has fostered in whites an attitude of white supremacy, that you are better because you're white, that you are the ones that have advanced civilization, that you are the goose that laid the golden egg, and the converse is that these black people are subhuman, that they came out of the jungles of Africa. They never contributed anything to civilization. So what effect has that had on our psyche? Why have we been in this country longer than most of you and your fathers and have less to show for it in terms of economic development? The Koreans just came and they're up and moving. The Haitians, our own black brothers and sisters from the Caribbean, just came here a few years ago as boat people. And today in Miami, there are 5 banks owned by Haitians in what they call Little Haiti. What is it about blacks who are West Indians, who come to this country, who begin to move up, and the blacks who have suffered in this country for centuries
Don't move.
have not as a body moved? It is because of this very word that this gentleman used. It is because of an educational system that has bred into black people an inferiority. And that attitude is so pervasive that even though consciously black people know what we should do, we find subconsciously actions on our own part that is always detrimental to our own best interest. And so,
I'd like to get your view on a related point to that. And there are some of us who have thought about this and who believe that that probably would agree with much of your analysis about what has happened to blacks in America after emancipation and so forth, but believe that the economics of it are at the core of what has happened, and that really the state, through welfare programs, if you will, has continued a system of slavery under another name. And I wonder what your view is of the economic relation between the state and what has happened to blacks in America generally, particularly since you can make this distinction between West Indian blacks who come here and are not in a system, not used to a system that basically fosters dependency. I mean, one can see it that way, and some of us do. What is your view of that, and how? What is the way out of that if you agree with that analysis?
I haven't been on the Caucasian people the same as we have either.
The race situation cannot be overlooked because it is out of the question of race that we were brought to this country for economic purposes. And slavery advanced the country economically, and the economic exploitation and oppression has continued to this day with a $240 or $50 billion purchasing power among black people. We have enough wherewithal in our hands to help government correct the intolerable condition of black people. The problem is we don't provide enough goods and services for ourselves, and those of us that do, that same mentality, going right back to this word, produced by education, religion, and enforced by police and law, causes black people to think that if you set up a practice as a doctor, and I set up a practice as a doctor, that because you're white, your medical practice must be better, because in some way we equate whiteness with superiority. And unfortunately, sir, if we are going to come together, we have to see each other as human beings. And if we're going to come together as human beings, then we have to recognize that the mind of white supremacy has to be broken up, and the mind of black inferiority has to be broken up. And it cannot be broken up by a soft shoe tap dance around the real issue. People have to know the truth about race in order to bust up forever our reliance on race as a means of identifying one as superior or greater than the other. And that is the sickness in this society that will forever forbid us from coming together on terms of social, political, economic equality.
Well, I guess my question is doesn't a state system that doles out, if you will, in effect money, but goods and services through a vast bureaucracy,
Yes, it contributes.
doesn't it basically perpetuate
Yes, it does.
dependency?
It does.
So how do we get out of that, assuming that there is an alternative
Yes,
to
there is.
separation?
There is. Now, you know, the same dole system that is here is in the Philippines. It's in Africa. It's in Australia. Everywhere that whites have gone and set up power for themselves, they give things to the natives to keep them weak and powerless and accepting the dole, so that generation after generation after generation is in that weakened state financially, economically, because they're in a weakened and depressed state morally and spiritually. We travel by God's grace throughout the earth, And wherever we find black people relating to whites in terms of power, we find the same relationship that we're discussing with black and white in America. We find it with black and white in
The blacks
Australia.
have not done any better in Black Africa, is what you're saying.
No, by no means. By no means have we done any better. And so, I want to say an endearing term to you, and I don't want to sound strange, but, you know, my dear writers and editors and thinkers, you know, your responsibility in this is tremendous. I am a man that I know is greatly misunderstood, and my rhetoric, to use your words, or my words, are sometimes hard on the ear. You don't bust up a mentality that has existed for thousands of years with a pat. It's like a clod of earth. You have to break it up, and you break it up with a truth that may sound horrible at first, but it's the right medicine to produce the right results. And here's a man that is talking to black people. Word that is changing the attitude of black people toward themselves. And that's critical to solve the problem of drugs, housing, economics. You have to change attitudes. You don't change attitudes by changing law. That's a step in the right direction, but it's a whole process of re-education. And I respectfully submit that whites have to be re-educated, as well as blacks. If you want to bring people together, then there has to be that kind of education that will allow us to see each other in a better light. I'm missing a point that
How do we get out of the system of the dole?
yes, if you recognize that an injustice has been done to millions of black people, and you recognize that the injustice has been done, not certainly by this generation, but this generation can perpetuate that injustice by misunderstanding the nature of that injustice. If we together say we're not going to dole out, that's wrong. It's perpetuating this same thing, and it really leads to a body of useless citizens that are useless to themselves and therefore useless to the country. And this country cannot tolerate millions of useless citizens. So either we make them useful, or there's another plan. And that's that plan of actual genocide. And that's not far-fetched. It's very real. Very, very real. We can get to that maybe in a moment or two. Now, the Jews who were slaughtered under Hitler are now being paid reparations by West Germany to try to repair the damage. East Germany had a talk recently with the leaders of Israel, and one of the things that they had to do in order to better the relationship is to recognize that a wrong was done. I don't know whether they've actually agreed yet to pay reparations. The government of the United States recently recognized that a wrong was done to the Japanese Americans, and a form of reparations are being given to the Japanese Americans. What can we do to correct the wrong done to millions of blacks that has been perpetuated year after year, generation after generation? And every time black people get a leader that is not necessarily good for whites, but good for blacks. The government sees to it that we are deprived of that leader. How do you repair the damage? What is a fair and just balance? And I respectfully suggest that if I were free to teach the masses of our people, if I could teach them unhindered what I have been taught, that cleaned me up in all of these, that you see, we look different than any other black people you've ever met. We act differently, and you know then we are not the students of this system. We have an entirely different teaching. And when we approach you, we don't approach you scratching, we don't itch, we don't bend, we don't bow, we look you straight in your eye. We feel we are equal to you in one sense, in the human sense, even though we may not be equal to you in terms of strength, in terms of power, in terms of all of those things that go for civilization. But if we are given the freedom to do that, we believe in a short while, with your help, we could make ourselves equal. I think that reparations are necessary, and taking persons like myself, questioning us until you're satisfied that we are really not your enemies. Louis Farrakhan is not an enemy of America. This is where I was born, this is where I was raised, and I've been all over the world, and I've never seen another country on this earth like this one. She has serious problems, and if we're not going to address these core problems honestly, then I say it's best to separate.
Would you
Just let us go.
separatist nation interact at all?
Of course.
I mean, I'm trying to
Separatism-
picture what it would be like. I mean, would it be geological? I mean, is it a mental separation? Exactly what do you mean by the separation?
The mental separation is already taking place. In fact, we are already separated. We live in the ghetto.
But I mean for the good.
I understand.
I assume you're talking
Okay.
about for the advancement, for the betterment. I mean, what would the betterment of the separation?
If we found that honest, sincere working to solve the problem did not work, and separation of the two people rather than seeing us kill each other might be best, then we would have to have, as part of reparations, land, territory, on which to build a new reality. That shouldn't seem so far-fetched. Here are Jews suffering all over the world. And Jews and other whites, Gentiles, got together and took land from the Palestinians and gave it to the Jews and called it a new state, the State of Israel, supported by England, France, and America. And everyone, particularly Jews, applaud that. Fine. Then look again now at black people. If we can't make it here, this is not the only place on the earth, but look, we helped you build this. We have as much right to this as you have. So now, if we can't get along in peace, we fought, bled, and died for this nation. You have not even offered us the tiniest state, Rhode Island. We'll take that one.
Mr. Farrakhan,
No, I just want to finish your point. I'm sorry for being so long-winded. But there cannot be separation in a hostile spirit. If we agree that separation is best, how can we go for ourselves without the help of this that we have helped to build? We can't do it by ourselves. This has to be an agreement. So the hostility certainly can't be there. we have to, as a nation, cooperate with all the other sister nations of the earth. We're not going to go off in isolation under a tree somewhere. We want to do trade and commerce like every other independent nation. And that's what's written in the scriptures. And that's what the prophets predicted. And unless we work out a just and equitable way to stay together, then separation has to happen. And you know what? When you and your husband disagree, you have a talk, and you tell your husband, if you want to save your marriage, what you don't think he's doing. And he tells you the same. And if both of you don't make the changes to accommodate each other that you can stay together, then you come to the point where you say, sweetheart, this is not going to work. And what I'm suggesting, that as civilized people, we sit down and do the former, or the latter is sure to come.
Excuse me, Ted Agles and then Ralph Hallow and then Jerry Siegel.
Letting this get cold. I'm sorry.
What was that?
I'd like to ask a couple of questions, and again, in the spirit of a frank and open discussion, please take it in that spirit. First question is, does the Nation of Islam still teach that the white race is a mutant race?
I don't want to use the term muted. That's not our language. But not only do we teach that, your own scholars and scientists today are saying to you and to white people, and this is part of the process of breaking up the mind of white supremacy and black inferiority. Mendel said, dark skin is dominant, light skin is recessive. Dark eyes are dominant, light eyes are recessive. You can get the recessive from the dominant, but you can't get the dominant from the recessive. Anthropologist Leakey said, trying to find the origin of man, he found that all human beings originated in Africa. He brought Africa as the birthplace of civilized people. Newsweek magazine, it's not the Bible, but a few years ago on the cover of Newsweek magazine, they had a drawing of Adam and Eve, and they were dark people in the drawing. And now recently, your scientists, certainly not ours, have taken the DNA of all human beings, and they say that all human beings have derived from the black woman. Now, that's white scholarship. Now, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said to us that the black man is the original people of the earth. And I don't think anthropologically, historically, or any other way that we can say that we are not. And that does not make one superior to another, but that is a fact. Now, if white people are not natives anywhere, you don't refer to yourself as Native Americans, Native Alaskans, Native Central Americans, Native South Americans, Native Australians, Native New Zealanders, Native South Africans, Native to Palestine, Native to Arabia. Well, then if you're not Native, then what is your origin?
Are white people Native human beings?
If you would be that.
No, I'm asking the question in the view of the Nation of Islam.
I cannot say that whites have acted humanly. I would rather say that whites have the potential, as we all do, to become human beings, but white supremacy has stopped that process of evolution among the majority of white people. You have not, listen to me carefully now, you have not yet evolved to that state. And the prophets of God, who could have, would have evolved you to that state, have been rejected and their teachings destroyed. And what we have right now, that's what this whole thing is about. People oppressing others and excusing it on the basis of color and race. That's not human. And so by depriving us as a people of our humanity, you deprived yourself of your own. Not you, personally. This is not a personal thing, but your people have not evolved. And to prove that, sir, one only need read the history of whites in their interactions with Native Americans, Hispanics, blacks all over the world, Chinese, Japanese. It has never been a real human relationship. The people whom you've conquered have shown more humanity than you, the conqueror. The Native Americans invited whites in, and you came in, and they set you down, and they showed you how to plant corn, and they did all these things, and then you killed them and put them off in a reservation. That was not the human thing to do, and that is what happened in New Zealand, that is what happened in Australia, that is what happened in South Africa, that is what happened in South America. That is the history. That's not human.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Let me try to rephrase it just to be perfectly clear. If today we go over to a hospital and into a nursery, and we find a one-day-old black baby in one basket and a one-day-old white baby in another basket, are these two babies equally human?
Of course they are. And they have the equal potential to not only become human beings, but to become manifestations of divine characteristics. But what kind of environment are you going to put that white baby in? And what kind of environment are you going to put that black baby in? And I submit to you that if that white baby grows in this environment, under this education, religious, political, and judicial, and economic system, and the black baby grows the same, we'll be at this table 100 years from now talking about what can we do to solve the race problem. You're not producing human beings at all, and that's why we can't relate to each other on a human level.
Right.
And that's sad.
Rob?
Three things you said amused me. One is the Rhode Island solution, wherever it is, but that would ask white Americans in Rhode Island or wherever to become Palestinians. Clearly you don't mean that. I can't believe you mean that. Two, you chose to criticize the Reagan administration and the conservative Supreme Court for policies and decisions that, in terms of their own enunciation by the Reagan administration and the court, said they were attempting to reduce the dependence and increase the independence and self-reliance of the people who were helped originally by the civil rights laws that were then turned into paternalistic instruments, saying that, for example, the citizens, which never worked to help any black person that I'm aware of, but certainly worked to help a lot of white contractors, and on, in all of those decisions. I mean, why choose the one group of Americans who seem to understand precisely what you're saying, mostly to agree with it, and set out in all good faith to say that it's racist and morally rotten to do what we've done with our welfare system, which is based on the notion that blacks are stupid. Can't do it.
I think, sir, and I think I understand the question. Yes. That's, you had another one?
Your third part.
Well, I think if you handle those two, I'll be satisfied.
Okay. No, sir, certainly we want to get off of welfare. And if the Supreme Court, under the Reagan administration, had that intention, it was poorly communicated to us, because it would seem to me that if it were not hypocrisy and sincere, you would have to understand that to cut that off without building the support mechanism, and I think it was Mr. Reagan again that talked about the net to catch the people, you see, but there's no safety net for us. Now let's look at this. You cut back entitlement. You cut back on the education now. That is the preparation, supposedly, for the blacks to enter into what you call mainstream America.
This educational system is educating blacks.
Oh, I know that. I know that, but you have not, neither has the president, set up an alternative. What I'm suggesting, sir, is that education, bad as it may be, is better than no education at all. You can't, just because the system has not worked as well as it could, we can't deny the good that is in that system. That would be folly too. So look, we have blacks that have their doctorates, their masters in every field of human endeavor. And these blacks are making a contribution to the growth and development of every aspect of this nation. The problem is we lack the right kind of self-education that would direct that knowledge to lifting the bottom up. So by Mr. Reagan saying, let's cut this off, cut out a 10% set aside, even if blacks are not yet ready to take advantage of that law, that doesn't mean you should cut it out. Help prepare the black people to take advantage of a 10% set aside, that they might grow economically strong and less dependent on government. That, I think, would be the proper way to do it. But just to cut it off, and now if you look at the attrition rate of blacks in colleges, and those that are not going at all, it's going down, down, down. So where has this benevolent Reagan administration that wants to cut off,
Why?
I'm sorry.
Why the attrition? Why the diminution amongst black college students?
Well, sir, if people are failing economically, and again, there's another deeper reason. There's a real deep reason why blacks not only not going to college,
American experience.
blacks are not going to grammar school. The teachers in grammar school can't teach because of all of the discipline problems in grammar school. High school, this is unheard of, that you have to have police with guns and searching the students. I mean, this says that this thing has deteriorated.
Except in your community.
Now, yeah, but if you would just follow us around, and maybe this could be set up, and I'd like to demonstrate something to you. We could go into the worst high school that you have. Nobody can get any discipline. And we'll go in, and within 10 or 15 minutes, there'll be some discipline there. Like my brother went into Mayfair Mansion. And at first it was said we were vigilantes. It's not that. It's not that at all. And certainly if that were the case, 2 years after the fact, Mayfair and Paradise Manor, whatever it's called, are relatively crime and drug free. What is it about what we teach that has that profound effect on the minds of those who hear? You can take us to the very young. You can take us to the gangs. You can walk with us into the prisons. You can go with us into the universities. The result is the same. And I respectfully submit to you, sir, that even your own white students are beginning to reject what's on the plate called education. So what we're talking about, if you really want to make America work, not just for blacks, if you want to make it work for all American people, there's got to be some serious introspection and some serious overhauling of this whole thing called the United States of America. And in that regard, I believe that we as Muslims have genuine solution. Now, the first question you asked was about land, Rhode Island. You know, of course, the people in Rhode Island would be terribly upset. And I'm sure the Minutemen would probably ride again.
Also, it could be very crowded in Rhode Island.
Very much so. But if you look at this, and I think the Jewish people provide us with a wonderful model, if I may say. Here we are, the natural kith and kin of Africa. 400 years removed, an entirely new entity, but we have a right to Africa as well as to America. Think about this. In Africa, there are tens of thousands of square miles of land that is undeveloped, uncultivated. Look at the blessing that we have received by getting, quote unquote, education, technical education, and other kinds of education in this society. Where is it going? What good is it doing? Now, look at the prisons. Today's paper said 25% of our youth are either in prison, under court supervision, under parole. That says something. And then it said a whole generation of black men are just about lost. The prisons filled with young blacks. You don't have a solution for this. Okay. Suppose, and look at our rate of reform. We take people who are criminals, murderers, whatever, clean them up, make them better. We prove that we can reform our people. And really, if you give us a chance, we can help your people too. And we would be willing to do that. Listen now. Suppose I went to Mr. Bush and said, Mr. Bush, you have nearly, how many thousand blacks in prison now?
Well, in the country, the federal prison system says 750,000, 65%. They give a little lower figure, maybe black people or minorities.
So 60 to 70% of 750,000? So that's about 500,000 blacks in prison. And look at what you have on the streets with nothing to do, nowhere to go. And go back and look at the historical precedent of this country. When it was discovered, I think you will find, and I think history will bear me witness, that some of the prisons were emptied out. And those persons who had no hope but to stay in jail had a chance to help to build a new reality. I don't know whether prisoners settled in Israel, but I know a lot of alienated and disaffected Jewish persons wanted a land of their own, and they felt that that was the way to make their mark. And Jews all over the world have not given up their citizenship to migrate there. There are Jews in America helping the Jews in Israel. Now just look at this. I'm not going to point out an area in Africa, but just say that through the OAU and through our own brothers and sisters there, we struck an arrangement. And we drew off some of our young prison population and took some of our scholars and with the help of this government put them to work building a new reality. You would be surprised how many blacks would welcome the opportunity to build a new reality rather than lay fallow in the streets of America doing nothing.
That's right.
As a solution, I mean, the money that you spend on prisons, help us to help them. If we set out some reparations, those that wanted to stay, stay, but give them justice here. Those that wanted to leave, let them build a reality on that continent from which whites took us that would be contributive.
Subject to the approval, naturally, of the black African government.
Certainly.
Have you discussed this with leaders of black African government?
We are thinking along those lines, and we've made some beginning steps. And of course, you know, the African mentality, when you say criminals, they've got their own. They don't need any more. And they don't want any more. So I would respectfully say that if you say tomorrow, Farrakhan wants to draw off all the criminals, well, naturally, then you get a negative response. But if you say in front of that, the ability of us to reform our people is unquestioned, And that's the reason you have Malcolm X today. You would never have seen Malcolm X. He would have never seen the light of day as Malcolm Little hid away in prison in Norfolk, a correctional institution in Massachusetts. He might have come out and gone right back to criminal behavior because Malcolm only had an 8th grade education until the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad captured him. Really, Malcolm started reading everything in sight, as you know his history. And look at the brilliance of that man in his process of evolution. And that is the brilliance that's hiding in these ghettos. And if you give us a chance,
But
we will develop it.
Black Africa, Mr. Farrakhan, all of Africa is 4.5 times the size of the United States, and surely the areas where this kind of a solution would have a chance are already well spoken for, and I can't imagine any black African government wanting to share Shabelle province or any other mineral-rich part of Africa with part of our black population.
You'd be surprised. You'd be very surprised. Black Africa is crying out for black intellectuals and black professionals and black people of expertise in this country to come back to Africa and give their expertise to the development of that continent. And certainly that's leverage, isn't it? Right. If we bring this quality of people back, let us have some of this other quality and we will reform them.
Minister Farrakhan, finish your statement. You started earlier. You said, suppose that I went to President Bush and what would that be? I went to President Bush and what? What would you propose?
Propose to him a settlement of that kind of problem rather than killing our youth in the streets. Let us have them.
I saw some being killed on the way.
While I was on my way here, a young black boy was jumping over a fence, and we heard a shot fired, and he fell. Our car passed him, laying prone, and another young black over in the service station being handcuffed. This is the condition of our people. And you know this condition is intolerable. I'm saying to Mr. Bush, let us have our people. Give us a chance to reform them. Give us a chance to make something out of them as we prove we have that ability to do that. And let us negotiate with our own people in Africa, and I believe God will bless us to have them say, come in.
Wait, one minute. Explain to me first, Mr. Farrakhan. You said earlier that what you were looking for was honest and sincere efforts by white America to resolve this problem so that whites could, in fact, live in the United States and some equal system. Have you gone past the stage of believing that honest and sincere negotiations efforts can be made? Are you now at this point where you feel that the answer is reparations, movement to Africa, establishing a new society under... No one doubts that Louis Farrakhan has a staying power, and you've shown it over the past several years, to remain in the forefront of black leadership. No one doubts that. Do you see yourself channeling that leadership role, your position, to this effort, a separatist nation, a nation someplace else, or are you still in the mode of honest and sincere? Do you think that's possible? Where are you right now?
If we judge by history, and the history of quote-unquote sincere negotiations between whites, the government, and even the Indians. In today's Washington Post, there's a story about the Indians uniting because America seems to be reneging on treaty obligations. I don't know, sir, with all due respect, whether we can sit around and wait for sincere whites to emerge. We would hope that they would. But we have to, as black people and responsible people, plan a future for our children. We do not see any future for our people the way America is going. And if you take the state of black America, future for our people the way America is going. And if you take the state of black America that was formulated by John Jacobs and the Urban League, that document says that we are falling further and further and further behind with no real solutions in sight. If we are supposedly responsible leaders of our people, we have to think beyond sitting down in rooms like this, necessarily hoping to work out something. We have to plan the future of our people and be working that plan. And if some decent people show up that are sincere about black and white and making America a pluralistic society, then let's sit down at the table and deal with that.
What kind of timetable are you talking about, Mr. President?
I don't think you have a lot of time, to be very honest with you.
Are we talking 5 years? Are we talking 30 minutes? Are we talking...
Oh, well, I'm certainly hopeful that we have 30 minutes. But you can see the way this thing is going. What this gentleman said at first, and what I think someone said upstairs in your office, Mr. de Beaugrave, that the thought of blacks and whites killing each other is horrendous. It is horrendous. And so if something is not done, either to separate potential combatants or to put something in the mix that would tone down that which is leading toward this, then unfortunately we may not have 15 or 20 years to talk about.
So we have time for Isaiah is right ahead of you, friend. Just one second.
Yeah, well, I do have a question to ask you, but I just want to make sure that we're kind of understand where you're going on this. Your hope is that there could be a reconciliation in which black people, white people in this country can live as equals. What I'm hearing from you is that your expectation is that that is unlikely to happen, which is why you're now talking in terms of a separate nation. Is that, if I captured the sense of what...
Not quite.
Okay.
Not quite. It's just the reverse. We do not have the hope that we can affect true reconciliation. We don't have that hope. And ever since the Nation of Islam became a reality, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was saying to America that separation will solve the problem between black and white. He said, however, that what we want as a people is freedom, justice, and equality. If we can get these three essentials of life within the socio-economic, political system here, then suddenly there's no need to talk about separation. But he never held out that hope as long as minds remained as they are. And his sentiment, spoken 60 years ago, is more justified today than it was 60 years ago when he spoke.
This isolates you somewhat, does it not, from the other black leaders of America who are still very much preaching that there is that reconciliation is the only way?
You know, sir, again, with all due respect, the black leaders who are preaching reconciliation, these are the people who have your ear, but they don't have the ear of the masses of the people. The masses of the people have gone beyond what you're talking. I mean, this, if you, and you doubt my word, you go and talk to the people in El Barrio, or the people in the ghetto that are suffering and have been suffering like this for years. They are not thinking in terms of reconciliation. They're talking bread and butter issues, and they don't see bread and butter coming because black and white can sit down and have tea together. I mean, we're not talking let's get together. We're talking about some economic substance that people can build a future on. But boardroom and bedroom getting together is not solving problems
Well,
for
even
black
though you
people.
might denigrate this boardroom, Mr. Farrakhan, our magic witching hour is 2 o'clock. Would you mind staying a few minutes longer because we have
I
a
would
couple
not
more
mind.
questions
There was
here?
something I wanted
See, everybody wants to Tom.
But he didn't finish his point.
That's solid.
Yeah, the question I had goes back to what we were talking about much earlier concerning Mayor Berry and the harassment of black elected officials. You yourself are a family man who values family, respect between husband and wife. When you have a political leader which does not exemplify that, when you have a political leader who has not been effective in using his resources to benefit the masses of black people, when in fact you have a political leader who makes himself vulnerable to, as you said before, attacks from government, entrapment, whatever you want to call it, shouldn't the people of the city make a moral judgment that that kind of political leadership is intolerable for us, that we have to replace that leadership with people who have more integrity, people who have a higher sense of value, people who would be able to better withstand the kind of harassment that you believe exists?
Who are you referring to, John Kennedy?
Right, exactly.
Are you referring to John Kennedy? Or did you mention Mayor Barry?
I did mention Mayor Barry.
Oh, well, that reference is back to John Kennedy. See, now, if you can't take that same yardstick and talk about white political leaders,
Right.
then you're very hypocritical to do that.
Okay, but that,
Wait just a minute, sir. Just a minute, please. Please. Was John Kennedy faithful to his wife? Was Eisenhower faithful to his wife? Come on. Was Roosevelt faithful to his wife? Listen to me. But none of you have ever. While that man was sitting in office, he was protected by those who knew his problem, quote unquote. Now wait, and I think it was the Carter administration, some of Carter's aides were allegedly found sniffing cocaine at a party. It was brought out in the press, and then it was quiet. We haven't heard any more about it.
Was Gary Hart protected?
No, he wasn't president.
No, of course not. He was not protected. Sir, but let me say this. Here's what you're having, sir. You have a trend now of getting political leaders. See, what he said is, don't you think, and I'm supposed to make a moral judgment on Mayor Barry, when in this room, I doubt if we had Father Confessor in here, that everybody in here hasn't been so clean and wholesome and nice to their family, and I doubt if everybody in here has been clean with respect to cocaine either. So now, I'm not insinuating, but look, in boardrooms all over America, people are coked up, man. That's why planes are falling out of the sky and trains are cracking up on the highways, and the American people can't walk the streets, can't ride in buses, because coke is not just on the agenda of somebody like a Mayor Barry. It is everywhere. It is pervasive. So my point is, I don't want to be questioned in a way to be used to single out Mayor Barry, when that is a pervasive thing. If you're going to deal with Mayor Barry, let's deal with everybody who's doing that. And let's have everybody submit to, what do you call it? A urinalysis, which of course Mr. Schultz and them and a lie detector thing said he wouldn't submit to nothing like that. But I personally believe everybody who's a public servant should have a urinalysis. I don't think that anybody who is coked up or alcoholed up or anything else like that can be fully trusted with the reins not only of government, they can't be trusted to run the affairs of their own house. And how many millions of Americans are in that condition? So I don't think it's fair to single out Mayor Barry because of the political climate in Washington. I think we ought to be more broad in the way we say it, and then if you wish to mention Mayor Barry, that's fine. But I think, as the facts are known, the people will make a moral judgment. I think the people will make a moral judgment. And I would hope that we wouldn't write, because to me, write in a way that denigrates Mayor Barry for the good work that Mayor Barry has done. Mayor Barry is loved by his people, and he has served his people and the city of Washington in many respects very well. Maybe no better, but certainly no worse than a lot of other people who are in office today, that are in the Senate, that are in the Congress, in the toilet with little boys, or pages, and in here with little girls, or over there with the sea. There's a whole moral thing now that's going on in America, and they grabbed, of course, Mr. Hart, and really, I don't think Hart was fairly handled, in truth. And if you're going to apply that yardstick, keep on applying it. Don't stop. Don't start with Hart and then forget. And then when something else is leaked out on your sitting president, you hide that. No, if you're going to do it all the way. And that's just, and that's fair.
Fran,
I
I'm
want
sorry.
to just ask a question about black leadership, which is where West was going. When we talk about black leaders, and there have been black leaders throughout history who have been able to rise up the masses, to get them to think to better themselves. You have, in your Nation of Islam, gotten thousands of people to listen to you, but your message gets lost in some of the rhetoric, and people are afraid of, when I say people, white people are afraid of who Louis Farrakhan is in the rhetoric, and they don't see some of the teaching that you use to get people to turn themselves around. My question to you would be, how can you get across the message that you are giving to young black men that makes them want to join the Nation of Islam, and which could ultimately bring black people out of prison, out of poverty, whatever. But the point gets to what Isaiah is saying. We here in the district, I'm asking you two things. We here in the district do have, as a race, the ability to affect our leadership. And I think that what we are saying is that we have to hold our leaders to a higher standard, and certainly a high standard of integrity, which you present in some of your religious teaching. And that's what we're saying. Don't you think it's time for black people as a whole to stop protecting our leaders all the time and hold them to the high standards that we want them to portray to the rest of the world? Because just because John Kennedy was a womanizer, that was before my time, and there's nothing I can do about it. But right now, I have Marion Barry to deal with, and quite honestly, I'm not happy.
Is present, and you are not happy with brother, then you have the right to exercise that right at the polls and do what you think is best in your conscience. I do feel that what you have in government is representative of what you have in the people. And until we produce a better quality of leadership, we will not produce a better character in the people.
So the question is, what is the message that you give that has black people listening to you, that you think could raise the quality of leadership of blacks as a whole?
It is self-knowledge. It is self-worth. It is showing black people their connection to their Creator. You know, there's a saying in the Bible, as a man thinketh, so is he. And as we have been made to think inferior, then we act in an inferior way. Once you change the way we think, then you will change the way we act. Your original question mentioned that some of the good that I do gets lost in some of the rhetoric that is reported. But you see,
reported is a good word.
Yeah. See, you know, there are certain things that don't sell newspapers. And this is a business. And Then you have to look at the climate, the context that Farrakhan came to national public attention in. And it was at the time of the Jesse Jackson campaign. And believe it or not, I was on a hookup with black preachers around this country when Jesse Jackson was being questioned about the Jaime remark, or maybe shortly thereafter, after he had confessed that he made it.
Yeah.
And these black religious people, as God is my witness, I said, why don't we sit down with members of the Jewish community and reach some agreement? And they said, Farrakhan, you can do that if you want to. But we've already sat down. They want Jesse. I'm paraphrasing the words. Farrakhan, at a meeting of 8,000 to 9,000 people in Chicago, said the press was present, because they were following Jesse, and Jesse was present. Here are my words, and you can get the actual text. I said, when blacks and Jews interests converge, we have always worked together. But when our interests are opposed, Jews have always followed their self-interest. And as we are coming of age, Reverend Jackson, to us, is our self-interest. I said, criticize him if you will. Debate him if you will. But do not create a climate in which he can be killed. I said, we're tired of feeding our leaders to white America like raw meat to wild beasts. And I say to you, if Reverend Jackson is harmed, he will be the last leader that you kill.
What do you mean by that?
I meant, and I qualified that. I said, we do not carry any weapons to do harm to anyone. But I said, I believe that Reverend Jackson is before us of God. And I said, I not only believe that the people will rise up, but that God himself will retaliate against you. This is the full context of it, and it's several years, but I would be glad to present you with the tape so you can check to see whether I've said anything false here. The next day, Nathan Perlmutter in New York was calling me the new black Hitler. That's how it all got started. And I was calling for dialogue. Listen to this. Louis Farrakhan was calling for dialogue. And the next day, I was the new black Hitler. Right. And as God is my witness, I was at the Final Call building, and a reporter from Newsweek, a black reporter, was in the audience. And I was coming off the road, working for Jesse Jackson in the campaign. I was tired. That's right. And I was speaking from the heart. And I said, well, here come the Jews. They call me Hitler. Well, that's a good name in that Hitler rose his people up from the ashes of their defeat in World War I. And I'm trying to rise our people up from the ashes of slavery. That's the only comparison you can make with me and Hitler. I said, now I'm not happy, listen to these words, over what Hitler did to the Jews. So don't compare me with your wicked killers. By and large, those are my words. The Newsweek had it, they held it. You know the Milton Coleman flap. And I was accused of threatening the brother's life. I called Milton Coleman. I said, brother, I want to sit down and talk with you. He says, well, the only way I'll talk with you is if you publicly say that you meant no harm to my family. I said, I'll do better than that. I said, I'll be on Nightline tonight, and I will mention it on Nightline. He said, well, if you do, then we'll sit down and talk. I mentioned it on Nightline. I called Milton Coleman the next day, and the editors and people at the Washington Post said to him that he shouldn't meet with me. And we never met. Here we are, we're family. We can't meet to resolve a difference. Somebody else comes in between and says, don't meet. And so I, Louis Farrakhan, went to Percy Sutton. While I was in New York, I said, Mr. Sutton, I'm going to go and speak with the Jewish leaders. And this is a fact. I called Nathan Perlmutter at the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith. And Nathan Perlmutter, at that time, I believe, was in Rome.
Yeah, that's right.
And they said, as soon as he get back from Rome, he will call you. And he came back. And his office did call. And we were going to meet. And when the Milton Coleman thing hit, Mr. Perlmutter wrote me a letter. And in that letter he said, not until your rhetoric cools down will I speak with you. And I wrote Mr. Perlmutter a letter and said, Mr. Perlmutter, I regret that we are talking with each other in words through the press, which is at best not a good medium to convey our words accurately. I hope that someday you and I will be able to sit down. And Nightline, when this thing was real hot, called me. They wanted me to get on Nightline and debate a Jewish leader. I think it was Mr. Bookbinder or somebody else like that. And I sent a message to Ted Koppel. I will not come on television and debate a Jewish leader, exacerbating the tensions that exist between the two people. I said, if we met in private and came together, then I would go before the television and say we've worked out some kind of arrangement. This is the anti-Semite, see? This is the man that loves Hitler. And I'm telling you, this is what you call me. I mean, not that I'm that. I'm just using this in a how would you call it?
What about the gutter religion remark?
Yes, of course. I'll get to that. And I just wanted to say that I've ever reached out. And since then, I have sat and talked with highly placed Jewish rabbis in the city of Chicago. Not on one occasion, but on 2 occasions.
That's right.
And they came to my home and had dinner with me. And I invited them to the mosque, to the dedication of our mosque in Chicago, as God is my witness. And they refused to come because they said it would send the wrong signal. You can interpret that if you wish. The man asked me, would you speak before the board of rabbis? I said, if you could arrange it, tomorrow. And then the other rabbi said, would you speak to the synagogue? I said, if you invite me, I'll come tonight. And when I took the invitation so quickly, they thought there must have been something in it, and they never extended that invitation to me. I'm saying this to you, this is on the record, and all of this can be substantiated. Now, the gutter religion part, you know. And this is tragic. Every time my name is mentioned, you know, it says, Farrakhan, who praised Hitler, called Hitler a great man, and called Judaism a gutter religion. I don't care what I did good. If I carried an old lady across the street and helped a blind man, even made a blind man see. You write that in the paper and said, and Farrakhan made the blind man see, but he's the one that called Hitler great and said Judaism is a gutter religion. Now, I want you to know, and I'm not a dishonest person. I had just come back from overseas from the Muslim world. And I made a speech in Boston, Massachusetts at a white church. I made the statement in Boston, the press was there, and I made the statement again in our own building in Chicago. Here's my statement. I said that state called Israel has not had any peace in 40 years. And she will never have any peace, because there can be no peace structured on injustice, lying, thievery, murder, and using God's name as a shield for your dirty religion. Those are my exact words. The next day, nobody said to me, Farrakhan, what did you mean? What did you mean by that remark? Next day, headlines. Farrakhan calls Judaism a gutter religion. This is my assistant. The day after that story broke, a Jewish doctor called him from New York and said to him, did Farrakhan make that statement? And what did you say?
I said, no, he did not make that statement. I told him, he said that, well, I read it in Rupert Murdoch's New York Post, and he had a patient that he felt that it gave a heart attack to. But I told him that he did not make that statement.
Did the patient die?
The patient died.
The patient died as a result of reading a headline on a statement that Farrakhan didn't say. But it was a distillation of words put in the context of a political campaign, people after Jesse, and using me and words that I speak to get after Jesse. Now, I have explained this over and over and over again. And those who have listened to me, I'm not just a newcomer, I've been speaking for 36 years. And you can't go back and get my speeches 36 years ago and find me attacking Jews. Never in my history have I attacked Judaism. This is my son. He's grown up in my house with 9 children. And this boy could not tell you that I have ever told him one negative thing about Jews or Hispanics and asked him to call Jews kikes or Spanish people spicks or Italian people wops. I hated the reference to us as niggers, and I never wanted my children to grow up using any of that kind of language with respect to any other human being. Now, here's what I'm saying. What God revealed from Moses to Israel is pure truth. And it was designed to purify Israel and make her a great nation. I am saying that Israel's actions against the word of God are not clean. They are unclean. That's Farrakhan talking. And if I'm wrong, straighten me out. But don't call me anti-Semitic as though I have some plan in my heart to kill Jewish babies and put them in ovens like Hitler did. This is an awful characterization of a man. I said, not only have Jews practiced unclean religion, but Muslims and Christians. That's how we are in this condition right now, because people use Jesus' name, but Jesus didn't teach slavery. He didn't teach what we've undergone, and neither did Muhammad.
Well, it seems that your words sometimes may end up different than your intention. But I wonder if you can clarify this statement that you made at a speech that was taped for a radio broadcast in Chicago, and the excerpts were not broadcast, and this is the excerpt from part. You were saying that a race war will erupt in the United States by 1986, with urban street gangs playing, quote, a very important role, end quote. Whites are terrified by the prospect, you said, and Jews are especially afraid, quote, because they have an idea of what's rolling around in the back of my brain. Your quote continues. They knew me before I was born. Some of those Jews, they know me like a man knows his own son. I I don't have any evil in my heart, but I know if I'm allowed to continue to do what God has put in my heart, we will have the most awesome war machine that the earth has ever seen. He went on to say that gang members were, quote, born to settle the score, end quote, and that they would be called upon to support and defend the black community. Quote, we are going to shake the world. Blacks will rightfully inherit the promised land, end quote. Can you clarify what you meant?
I think, I don't know what speech that's from, but I think I recall the words. You know, you have in this country young black people, young white people, young Hispanics. It is the strangest generation that we've ever produced. It is the most violent and the most brutal generation that we've ever produced. And it is without a doubt, if these conditions are not corrected, we will have race war. And I firmly believe that this is why whites in this nation fear black youth to the point where drugs are flowing into the black community. And it's not accidental that in 1985, when I made my speech at Madison Square Garden, in spite of all the propaganda, there were about 30,000 people in the garden and maybe 10 or 15,000 on the outside trying to get in. And it so alarmed those that fear the rise of any black man that has the ear of the masses of our people. Right after that, crack started flooding into Harlem. And there's a recent edition of one of these weekly magazines that says, crack babies soon to enter school. Meaning, this is now 5 years, 1990, and crack spread throughout the black community. Now, if you look in Los Angeles, you find young blacks, not only in Los Angeles, in Chicago and other places across this country, with Uzis. We don't make them. AK-47s, we don't make them. Street sweepers, shotguns that shoot 15 rounds in less than 6 or 7 seconds. Where are black youth getting these weapons? And what I'm suggesting, sir, is that there's a mindset in black America growing, and your people know it, the wise know it, that if justice is not done, this people will absolutely rise up against their oppressor. As you find the youth rising in South Africa, and there's fear of what that portends. There's fear in America of what that portends. And there's no mistake about it, sir. The voice of truth that is in my mouth is the voice that will absolutely attract the masses of the people. And that is why J. Edgar Hoover, when he identified these messiahs or supposed messiahs, his aim was to keep them away from the black youth. And I must say to you, in deference to the scriptures, the 37th chapter of Ezekiel talks about some dry bones in the valley. And those dry bones were disconnected, and God put the Son of Man, one like unto the Son of Man, in that valley, and the bones start coming together. And the book says, and when the bones stood up, they stood up an exceedingly great army. And these blacks will stand up, and that only suggests that they will be organized and they will be under some commander or teacher that will be their leader.
So you see a physical race war within the next, well,
86 has gone past.
So obviously that has to
Provided that's what you said.
When do you see this race war taking place?
Well, we're sitting at this table, and if reasonable men do not do the reasonable thing, the gentleman asked me what time, how much time do we have? Do we have 30 seconds? You all are the masters of this. How long do you think it will be before what the Holy Quran says, persecution is worse than slaughter? People can only take so much. You look at Eastern Europe, and one day Ceausescu was in power, and the next day he was gone, or within a few weeks he was gone. There's a movement among the people today. They're not waiting on leaders. They're being led by a spirit that is bigger than all the leaders put together. And that's why the leaders themselves did not and could not calculate the movement in Eastern Europe, and the leaders are running to catch up with that movement. And most of the black leaders that you recognize, they're running to catch up to the movement of black youth.
Several things you've said indicate that you believe in the existence of what's often called the plan. Could you address that just briefly? Do you believe there is this thing called the plan that's been devised by white leaders, and if so, who
Yes.
and what are its dimensions? And
Well, let me put it like this. Do you subscribe to any religion at all?
I do, yes.
Do you believe in the Bible as a religious person?
I do.
I do too. And the Bible has lots of references in it that we don't believe are there for conjecture. And one of those, and several of those references, I will quote to get to the plan. 1. Pharaoh, when the children of Israel were under his grip, saw the children of Israel multiplying. And he was frightened by their increased numbers. And Pharaoh said, and I quote, "Come, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply and join on to an enemy of ours and come against us." Then Pharaoh, dealing wisely, means come up with a plan. And the plan, succinctly stated, was kill all boy babies of the children of Israel and spare the female. And that plan carries through in many references in the Old Testament, but that one is the strongest. And then in the New Testament, when they expected the birth of the Messiah, Herod set out to kill all male babies. Now here we are in America. America is not mentioned by name in the Bible, but any wise scholar of religion will say, if you press it, if the prophets could see and didn't see America, then they couldn't see. And if they saw America, under what symbol is America in the Bible and in the Quran? And if our sojourn in America, millions of us in bondage, is not seen by the prophets and written of by the prophets, then they couldn't see. But they did see, and they did right. And here we are in America, have been here 400 years. And now the demographers are saying that if white birth decline continues, by the year 2000, whites will be at 0 population growth, a birth for every death. And if black birth rate continues, in less than 100 years, blacks could be equal to or the majority population. Now, is there a plan? I believe with all my heart that the scriptures are pointing not just to kings and rulers past, but to presidents and rulers present. And it certainly has been a plan of the United States government to deprive us of leadership, to deprive us of the ability to organize, to keep the strong leaders from ever getting funding, and that plan is in operation today. If you look at the death rate among black people, they say there are 60,000 excess deaths of blacks over the normal death rate. And they account for this 60,000 excess deaths per year with cancer, AIDS, homicide, black-on-black crime, etc. Now, what is this? What is this? Is this a plan? Where are the drugs coming from? We don't make them. Where are the guns coming from? We don't make them. Somebody is inspiring black people to kill off each other. Who is it? Who is the unseen hand? We respectfully believe that it's the government of the United States of America, and we believe they have that plan, and we believe that that plan is in operation, and we believe that is exactly why our community is in the condition
How are
that
they
it
keeping
is
this
in.
plan secret from so many of us who are so opposed to this?
It's not secret.
Well, I don't know about it.
Well, then you should do some investigative reporting.
Is it something that the
It's
president?
amazing, though, that, seriously, I mean, if I uncover such a plan, believe me, I'll share it with you instantly.
You can get the Pulitzer Prize.
But I do that before I thought about the Pulitzer Prize. It would be so horrendous.
Well, now, how do you account, sir, with all due respect now, excuse me,
The Federal Emergency Management Administration that Oliver North was working on was reported in the press.
would you want to just say that?
Just briefly, during the Oliver North hearings, they mentioned the FEMA, or the Federal Emergency Management Administration, which handles hurricanes, etc., and that they had a plan for the mass concentration of black people, detention of blacks. And there had been a plan in effect like that, not under necessarily that name, but that is the latest incarnation of it. And you can do research on that and find it out for yourself.
Does President Bush know about this plan? I mean, is it at that level of the government?
Well, the scripture says Pharaoh, and Pharaoh was the head of that government. I would imagine Bush is sitting in that uncomfortable seat.
If I could make one statement, though, in the absence of that plan, are you saying then that black people are on drugs and killing each other and all of this because it's inherent in our nature? I mean, if it's a two-sided question. If it's not a plan, then what is causing it?
Hey, there's a war white drug addicts and peddling drugs to my kid. I mean, why this notion that it's exclusively black? I don't see what sort of a racist notion.
See, you know, sir, you need, I don't wish to say it like that. I'd say it like this. If you're really interested in really uncovering this, look at the statistics and see how long drugs have been in our community, long before it spilled over into your community. And there was no concern as long as it was a black problem. Now, like everything black is spilling over into whites. White folks sing like black people. White folks dance like black people. White folks speak slang like black people. So white folks now
Not as well.
getting into drugs. And so now it's a concern because the drug is destroying the heart of this nation. So, but there was no concern when it was with us, and it came out when the civil rights movement was at its height. A pure form of heroin was released into the ghettos of America. All of these things can be substantiated. Go back and look up the Tuskegee plan and how whites infected 100 black men with the most virulent form of syphilis and let them go untreated and allowed them to cohabit with women, I don't know what kind of women, any kind of women, but in those years, black men couldn't freely mix with white women.
Are you suggesting that the President's National Security Advisor is a Judas to his
They're
race?
looking for something sensationalist.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we ought to entertain that type of thing. That's what we're here to have an honest discussion. And you all seem to be here for a headline. And that's maybe we're going to reach a point where we're not in the same purpose.
No, I think that the question that Ralph Hallow was asking is
I understand
that
this question.
if there is such a plan, it's the most dastardly thing that any of us have ever heard about or read about. And he's asking quite simply, is the National Security Advisor, in your judgment, aware of such a plan?
Why not ask if any of the other people that are in the positions of authority, longer than he's been, if they know about it?
According to a poll done in the Washington Post, most black people believe that there's such a plan exists.
Well, that's one of
Well,
the
that's
reasons why
the-
we're asking the question.
Exactly.
Is to find out how widely held is this belief.
Well,
Because, you know, quite frankly, we're talking about frank discussions, as you probably know, as you can tell by this reaction to this table, most whites find the idea of a plan as such incredible, that means that something that's written down and organized could be carried out without...
But you know,
knowing.
sir, with all due respect, you know, if we just, in honest and frank discussion, look at the condition of our people. Here are infants born in Harlem, and the infant mortality rate in Harlem is lower than in one of the poorest third world countries in the world, Bangladesh. How could this be? How could we be dying at this rate unless there is a plan? Why is it that America creates no jobs for the unemployed, but leaves room for blacks to be employed, and poor whites and Hispanics in the army, so that they can be all that they can never be in the society? Why? What is the plan? Huh? What is the history, sir, of Europeans in Africa and in South America and in New Zealand and in Australia, when black populations and Native American populations seemed to be in the way? What was the plan? Was it not genocidal? Why should we ignore history just because we're in the greatest nation on earth, but she is wiser in these deadly arts than most people? And I respectfully suggest, sir, and I've said this publicly, and I don't mind saying it again, sir, that the Chinese government rolled over Chinese youth with tanks in Tiananmen Square. And Mr. Bush did not speak forthrightly against the slaughter of those youth. In fact, he was very timid. And I personally believe, as I have watched the way, with due respect, and I will close this after this question. You have to look for me. With respect to all of you who are present, yes. You know, when the United States disliked and dislikes Muammar Gaddafi, the American government accused Gaddafi of the terrorist bombing in the Rome and Vienna airports, and then accused him of bombing the discotheque. And the news media kept on talking about Gaddafi until the president himself, Reagan that is, called Gaddafi the mad dog of the Middle East. And as much as America loves dogs, nobody loves a mad dog. And when you have a mad dog, you have to put the mad dog to sleep. The propaganda barrage is laid down, and the press, willingly or unwittingly, is the instrument that seeds the American public and gets them ready for the moves that the government makes. That happened with Gaddafi, and in the Congress, congressmen were literally calling for his death. And in the American public, radio disc jockeys were raising money to pay a hitman, all in the open now.
You approve of his lifestyle, his personal lifestyle?
I'm not his judge. I know nothing about that man's personal lifestyle. Nothing. Nothing. But my point is that the press created the climate. That's my point. When Mr. Reagan and Mr. Bush don't like Noriega, he's an indicted drug person. But they've known Noriega all along. Whatever Noriega was or is, he has been a co-partner with American intelligence agencies. Mr. Bush has known him, and if he's got all this money in the banks, Mr. Bush paid him and others. Now all of a sudden he becomes a bad guy, and he's looked at as this dope user, this dope peddler, and you all keep feeding this. When I say you, I'm talking about the press now. So the American public says, oh, it's no good man. Then on December 19th, Mr. Bush can bring out stealth bombers and go down and bomb the PDC headquarters like Mr. Reagan bombed the home of Muammar Gaddafi. In that district where the PDC headquarters was, called the Chorrillo district, is populated by mostly black and mestizos. And according to what we have gleaned and learned, it wasn't 232 deaths of civilians. When you first reported this so-called war, you said that a state of war existed. That's what Noriega said, a state of war existed. But then you turned it and said Noriega declared war on America to justify what the government was about to do. Now they've killed not 232, but thousands of men, women, and children, according to some statistics that we have from the university in Panama. And over 417 bombs fell, according to those seismographic recordings of the impact of those bombs. Not only did he bomb Panama City, he bombed Cologne, 85% black. Now, what does that mean to me as a black person? I ask you, as Caucasian people and my black sisters and brother, according to some statistics, 70% of the drugs in America are used by white people. But when you read it in the newspaper, it is as though only blacks are using drugs. Only blacks are selling drugs. Here's the president going down to Cartagena talking about the coca plant and trying to say to these leaders that we have to develop a new way of giving some economic strength to these nations to stop them from growing the coca plant and cutting off the demand in America. But there's never been a word said about blacks who have no jobs, who are offered the chance to sell crack and live better than they could ever live by taking a $3.35 an hour job at Wendy's or McDonald's. And so the press for the last 3 or 4 years, just look at it. Look at the movie industry. Look at what is created now in the minds of white people against black people. If the news keeps showing a black man dead here in Washington, shot down, gun war, blacks in Los Angeles, and this is featured night after night. And you show young blacks with their bandanas and their arms over their shoulders on television, in the newspapers. What is this doing to the American psyche? Are you getting ready for something? Like you did with Gaddafi and Noriega? Are you getting ready for something? That's what we think. Because the way you handled the situation with the young girl in Central Park, who was allegedly raped, going out nearly midnight for a run in Central Park, and she's allegedly raped by so many black boys, and the next day liberal white America is up screaming for the blood of these young men. And this news is not reported just in New York, it is international news. But when they took semen samples from the young lady, the semen samples did not match any of the 8 young men. And the semen sample that did match was the semen of her boyfriend. The press didn't come back and spread that around. Look at the way this Charles Stewart thing was handled in Boston. This is something that you should look at with a careful eye, because that young man planned this for a long time. And the press knew almost 72 hours after it was done who did it, and the police knew shortly thereafter or around the same time. But they kept this story going, all the way around the world. What are you trying to say? And then when an attack comes on black people, and we're rolled over in the streets, will you say these were gangsters and dope users and hoodlums? I say they're victims of societal mismanagement. They're victims of those institutions that have been horrible stewards of their lives. And I'm suggesting that if this is the plan as written in the Bible and the Holy Quran, I would appeal to Mr. Bush and all those who think this way. Be very careful, because you're not dealing with just these black people. You're dealing with God today. And God will punish America for your evil mistreatment of this people who have suffered in this country for 400 years, and the suffering still goes unabated. I'm looking at this, and I'm warning black people every chance I get to wake up and see. And I'd like to say to you, if you doubt that this is so, why don't you do some investigative reporting?
Mr. Farrakhan, we have gone 1 hour beyond our allotted time, and that's a great tribute to you. And it remains for me as the editor to thank you for your honoring us with your presence and contributing to our enlightenment. Thank you very much.
I thank you. Thank you all.
Mr. Farrakhan, thank you very much for coming.